So I'll give a kind of general introduction to Mantle for people who maybe have heard of it but don't know really what it's about. But I'll also be talking through a project that I've been looking at recently. It's a project that Dorothy Heathcote led, and I'm always interested to look at the work that she did, and it helps me to understand more what this system that she created was all about. So I'm giving you an example of how she approached this one project. I've been looking at it as part of a um, project that we're doing at the moment, Mantle Network that I'm involved with. We have a grant to look at particularly Dorothy's work with heritage and history projects. So I've been looking at different projects that she led and some of the archival materials we have about it. So I'll be talking through one of those projects. So what is Mantle of the Expert? So it's a method of teaching across the curriculum and meeting teaching targets through drama. So the key elements are you ask your class of children to think of themselves as if they are a fictional team of some sort, an expert team. And there is a fictional client. There are clients, and there are particularly one client who asks this team to take on a big job of some sort. So we call it a commission. Over the years, working with Schubert, we have been looking at the language of Mantle of the Expert and how difficult it might be to translate words from one language to another. Commission, I think, has some odd associations in India. I mean, not the, I think it's sort of money, isn't it, involved somehow, Schubert, with commission, the meaning of commission. This is simply means a big job that somebody asks this team to do. So, for example, it might be that your curriculum area as a teacher is ancient Egypt. You set up a fictional team. You ask them to think of themselves as a team of people running a museum. You might start with different tasks that give them a sense of what's involved in running this museum. And then somebody comes along with a big job for them. Perhaps they ask them to create an exhibition about the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. And so the children create this or plan this exhibition, and through doing that, learn a great deal about ancient Egypt. So there's a sense of the young people develop a sense of ownership over the work. They feel this is our team, this is our company, we've got an important job to do. It's one of the curious things about drama, even though it's fictional, people take it on board as if it's real because it feels real. They know all the time it's fiction, but it feels real to them. And through this, using the Mantle system, you can cover a range of curriculum targets that you have in teaching. So it's not just maybe history or science, it can bring in language, literacy, mathematics, can bring in a range. Whatever you want, really, can be brought into it in terms of your teaching. You're planning it, you're guiding it in order to meet your teaching aims. But there is this sense for young people of owning it, of this is our work. We're not doing it anymore simply for the teacher, because teacher says we're doing it because we feel this is our company and we've got an important job to do. So that's the basis of it. And a Mantle project might last a short time, a week, or it might be a few weeks spread out, or it might be that it lasts a term or even longer. It can even last a whole year. And the owner Tara Evans, who's with us today, and I, we are governors of Woodrow First School in Redditch in England, where a large part of the curriculum is taught through Mantle. And we can see that this really has an effect on the children and on their learning. So what is this strange term, this mantle of the expert? This is Dorothy's definition. Mantle meaning, I declare that I will uphold the lifestyle and standard of my calling. Now, mantle is an old-fashioned word meaning a kind of cloak, but for Dorothy, it wasn't literally a cloak. It was taking on this sense of, this is my job. I have an important job. I have an important responsibility. There's this sense of a calling. I'm called to do this. And expert meaning, furthermore, I will undertake to take seriously the acquisition of and using of those skills deemed necessary for and in that lifestyle I have entered because of my calling. Now, if you're asking people to take on this fictional team, you're not training them in a profession. So you're not, if you're asking them to run a museum, you're not training them literally to run a museum in later life. This is simply the framework. This is the point of view that you're asking them to take on. And really, it's about this dedicated purpose. This is our job. This is our responsibility. And so we need to take this seriously. We need to learn things so that we can carry out our job. What you're developing really is this group ethos, a set of values, a sense of, we take this seriously. We have this responsibility. We care. We care about the work we do. We care about the client or the clients that we help. And so there is this shift that takes place for young people within this system, this way of working. You really want them to become less dependent on the teacher and more taking on the responsibility and the active agency, the active responsibility for their own learning. Now, a lot of this goes back to Dorothy's paradigms, she called them. How do we view the children that we are teaching? And so she came up with this list. We may have different views of how we see the children because that will shape how we teach them. So if we see, now the standard model of teaching really is the child as vessel, as empty vessel, as a container which needs to be filled with knowledge. This is the standard review really in a lot of education around the world. There's this body of knowledge and the child doesn't have this knowledge and the child needs to be filled with this knowledge. That's the standard view of teaching and education. Now, Dorothy's model was different. She saw education, she saw the child as crucible. So what she means is that, like a crucible where you stir things round, but we, teacher and children, together are stirring things round and trying to find things out together. And once you have these kind of basic principles in mind, I think this really guides you in your teaching, in your way of working through Mantle of the Expert. And I often say to people, if you really take this system on board, it will change the way you teach and it will change the way you think about education because you will really have these principles in mind behind what you're doing. So this is a statement that she made. Now, I am a crucible, she said. I regard myself as one, and I believe children are crucibles. But this changes the world of the school. If tomorrow you walk in and say, from this moment in this classroom, it is crucibles and not jugs, it's not empty vessels that you're pouring knowledge in. From this moment on, I'm thinking of teaching as crucibles, stirring things round together. From that moment, Dorothy says, you're changing the world, and you're going to be changing it every second you decide crucible and not vessel. So you're really setting everything up so that you and the class are investigating things together and trying to come to an understanding together. So you're moving away from teacher dependency. Now, why is that important? And why did Dorothy see that as important? Well, children become teacher dependent because they are looking to the teacher to tell them what to do, to tell them the information they need, the tasks they need to do. And I think we find later on in education, once you come to higher education level, university level, young people are then being asked not to be teacher dependent, to do things on their own, to investigate things on their own. But there's this sudden change that they're now suddenly being asked to be independent learners. And really, I think we should be thinking of this earlier on in education, of giving young people independence in their learning. Because it's partly about, if you are active in your learning, then you get an ownership over it. You own the knowledge. And you know better, I think, how to use it, how to apply it. There was some work that I did in a school once in teaching mathematics through Mantle the Expert. And one thing that impressed the teacher very much was how much the young people became independent problem solvers, looking at problems, looking at finding their own way of solving things. And you're changing things then from the idea of the teacher as the one who knows the answers. You want to try and get away from that Mantle the Expert. You're not the one who knows all the answers. You may know more than the children, but you're trying to set it up so that together you're exploring and you're learning together. And this client that I talked about, this fictional client, becomes the outside agent. So we're doing things for the client and for our company. So this is changing the way teachers operate, changing the way teachers talk in the classroom, and changing the students too. So that you're making them active agents in their learning. They can't simply sit back and look at the teacher and say, tell me what to do. This is a rough structure for the Mantle project. There's no fixed structure for it. But this is based on things that Dorothy said over the years. And it's kind of a rough guideline for me anyway in planning Mantle, that you need, because usually as a teacher, you've decided, okay, this is my curriculum area. This is, I think the best way of going about this would be to have this kind of team. And they will end up in this kind of job that they will do. So you're setting it up. So you need, first of all, to engage their interest in it. And then you need to go through different tasks to build their sense of this. This is the job we do. We run this travel agency. We run this museum, or whatever the team is. And then at a certain point, you introduce the big job from this client, maybe through a letter. And then you set it up, the teachers set it up through this letter that asks the team to do certain job, and then that's what the team does. They undertake this big job and they publish the outcome in some form. That is a rough outline of the approach in Mantle of the Expert. And now I'm going to talk a bit about a particular project that Dorothy Heathcote did, which I've been looking at recently. And this was the starting point for Dorothy. Now, if you're doing Mantle of the Expert, your starting point might well be a curriculum area that you know you've got to teach. And this is not necessarily the starting point, it's the logical starting point. You've got to teach this, so you're thinking, how can I teach this in a way that's engaging and will be interesting for the young people to take on? But in this project, Dorothy's starting point was different. She started with 2 gravestones that exist in a churchyard in a small town called Prestine, which is just in Wales, just near the English border with Wales. And there's two gravestones to a young woman called Mary Morgan, who was hanged in 1805 for the murder of her newborn baby. And it was quite unusual at that time for somebody to be hanged for this offense. And there's become something of a legend in the area because there are 2 gravestones. One is quite sympathetic to her, and one is quite critical of her. And there's this curious thing about these gravestones because people don't quite know who put them there or why or when. And so a strong legend has grown up around them. Now, obviously, this is quite a gruesome story. And you may think, well, I'm not sure that I would want to do that with young people. And the children that Dorothy was working with were, I think, 8, 9 years old. So it was very young. And the classroom teacher that Dorothy was working with did have concerns about this as a subject. I don't want you to go away today and think, if you're doing Mantle of the Expert, it means you're going to be doing controversial subjects. No, it was Dorothy's choice in this case to base it on this story, and it worked very well, and the children responded very well to it. The classroom teacher, in the end, was very positive about it. So I just think, what a great way to start a project. To choose some historical object or artifact and build it around that. As I say, this is not the way you always do Mantle at all. This is simply one way that Dorothy did one project. But I think it's a lovely idea to take some kind of historical object that's got some kind of mystery to it or things that need investigating. So it's something that I think would be interesting to try, to think of an object that, like this, would take a bit of investigating, maybe. So the work was given this fictional context. It was placed really in a kind of story. So the children took on the point of view of people living in Prestine. So this was their fictional role. And Dorothy herself was in role as a new vicar who was just arriving in the town, the Reverend Heathcote, arriving to take up her new post. So the idea was that the children, as citizens of the town, could help the new vicar by showing her around the town, and in time this would lead them to look at, to investigate the mystery of the 2 gravestones for Mary Morgan. So this was going to lead into different curriculum areas. There are lots of different possibilities that Dorothy could see from this. So even though they were in the role of people from Prestine, she knew that the main thing that they would be doing in the course of this project, they would all the time be looking at things as if they were investigators looking for to understand old documents, old materials, and put together this story of Mary Morgan. So they would be like detectives. She wasn't calling them detectives. Of course, you could set up a Mantle where the team are detectives, but in this case, she wanted them all the time to be looking at things through this point of view of investigators. And she even started the project by asking them about the meaning of the word detective. And in a way, when you put young people into a point of view, you ask them to be people running a museum or running a travel agency, or you're asking them to take on this point of view. This is why I talked about it as a kind of calling. So running a museum, maybe the point of view you're trying to develop is this sense of we look after precious objects and we try to find their meaning and help others to understand why these objects were once so significant and important. That's the kind of ethos that you're trying to develop in the group. Or it might be if it's running a travel agency, it's about how do we help people to plan the best experiences? How do we make sure that their needs are satisfied? That's the kind of ethos that you're trying to build. And you really are not just teaching them now information or knowledge. You're trying to develop this group sense of what our job is and our responsibility. And in this case, it was about detecting. So she said, I've chosen that as my start. They will never ever stop detecting on Mary Morgan. And that means they can be trying to be like her through drama. They can watch what happened to her. They can read books about her. But detecting is the center of the whole Mary Morgan work. In other words, the children started by thinking about detecting, and they always found themselves detecting in one way or another. The underlying purpose, the point of view was always, we look into things. They were always looking into things for meaning and implications. And so then Dorothy had to think, okay, the idea is that there'll be citizens of the town and they will show this new vicar around the town. And in a way, the new vicar was the client in this case, because everything they did was to help this new vicar. And so, first of all, though, they needed to have a sense of being citizens and what the town was all about. So this is a strategy that she used to do this. It's a strategy that she used at other times, which was to actually, she would bring in a big sheet of cloth, green cloth, and lay it down, and the children would use it to create a map of a place. So they can bring in their own ideas and place things, place roads, place buildings, place the river or whatever to get a sense of a place. So as she said here, the new vicar has come to take over a parish about which he knows nothing. So the children will teach me, in role as the vicar, about the parish, which means I need some strategies so that they'll know about the parish before I can be taught about the parish. So they needed to know about this town so they could talk to her about it. So they created a map. And she used this cloth and she had labels for different buildings which they could add to the cloth. And obviously, really, they were creating their own idea of this town. It wasn't the actual place. It wasn't the real Prestine. It was their own choice to how this town should look. And she said that was her choice to give them this space to invent the place because she really wanted to build their ownership of the village. She didn't own it, the children owned it so that they could be the experts, because that's one shift that you're making. You're encouraging children to feel they have knowledge that is useful and to build this sense of expertise, the sense of their own expertise. So you're always trying to enable that sense that they are the ones who have useful knowledge here. And in this case, of course, they are teaching the teacher. They are telling Dorothy to what they know about the village. So she's deliberately putting herself in that position, in this role that she's chosen to take on. Now, one of the things she did in this project was one of the main sources of information for the young people would be kind of old documents about the Mary Morgan case. Because one of the things she was doing all the time through Mantle really was she didn't want to be in a position where the teacher was telling the children, was giving the information. She wanted them, it's this crucible model again, she wanted them to be investigating actively themselves. So for this project, they created these documents, which were based, many of them, on actual historical documents. But they were made to look old, like they were really old documents that had been found in an archive somewhere. And so it wasn't simply printed in a book. It was something that felt much more exciting and engaging because you felt like you were. I mean, obviously, these documents were simply tea stained and written by hand. And children in a case like this might well say to the teacher, "Oh, how did you make these documents?" And if you say to them, "Well, I use some tea stains," then they'll accept it because it's part of the drama, it's part of the fiction, but it just feels more engaging to have real or apparently real documents to look at, to try and make sense of. So these have obviously been chosen and written by the teacher to be selective. So they haven't got lots of information, but they've got enough information to go at. And they've got some of this material, Dorothy was aware that young people might find difficult to make sense of because it's quite challenging. I mean, that's something that she deliberately, well, believed in, that really you shouldn't make it too simple for the children, but there should be this challenging element to it in the way they engage with these materials to make sense of it for themselves. But at the same time, the teacher needs some ways of guiding their reading so that they're not overwhelmed by it, so it's not too difficult. So one method that she used, I mean, here's an example of how different these materials can look. On the left-hand side, it's a witness statement in the trial of Mary Morgan, and it's printed in a book, and it looks rather dull. You do the same document turned into this, what looks like an old document, written by hand, tea-stained. It just feels much more interesting to engage with a document like that than read it from a textbook. And this is one of the things in Mantle the Expert. It's creating these materials so that you and the children can look at them together and make sense of them together. In that case, you as the teacher can be in this crucible model mode of saying, well, I don't know what that means. What do you think? You're stirring it round together. And one thing that Dorothy did in order to help young people to read documents like this, so she's presenting it as if they are materials in an archive, and all materials that have been found, and somebody working in the archive has already looked at these documents and made some notes on them. So you can see this letter has been stuck onto a sheet. At the top, there's some writing to indicate, oh yes, it's come from an archive and it's been through an archivist who has written some notes on it. So the first sentence, to whom it may concern, the archivist has written, seems to be an order to somebody, not just a letter. So there's all sorts of marginal notes that somebody in the past, some archivist has added to this document. And that's there as a guide to the young people in their reading to help them to make sense of these materials. This is simply one strategy that Dorothy used as a way of engaging people in the materials in a way that would stretch them, challenge them, but be accessible to them. So they're looking at these materials, they're making sense of them, They are putting together themselves the story of Mary Morgan, and they're doing it for the vicar, because this new vicar has arrived and doesn't know about this story and wants to find out more. So within this project that Dorothy set up, there were all sorts of drama episodes. So, for example, yes, the arrival of this new vicar, this was the context for the curriculum work that they did. And the vicar acted as a kind of client, with the children as citizens, doing things for her. And so it made it all human. There was this human element at the heart of it. And so there were a number of drama episodes. There was a ceremony. The people of Prestine turned out to welcome the new vicar and present their gifts. In one episode, the children stood as if they were representing gravestones in the churchyard, and each of them held a small image of a gravestone which they'd created, and Dorothy, as a vicar, passed among them. And as Dorothy observed, drama allows you to be gravestones 1 minute, thinking about seeing things from the point of view of a gravestone, and then you can switch to being people again, because it's all in their mind. You do it yourself. You can make it happen in your head. So in one episode, they were gravestones. And then in her role as vicar, she saw, well, she could call a parish meeting to discuss matters concerning the town. And she'd get a list from all of the children of what they might consider. What kind of business would this parish have to consider, to look at? Issues about dogs roaming free in the streets or street lighting or whatever. There would be a list, and she'd call a parish meeting, and in course of that parish meeting, she could raise the question of the gravestones, and which would allow her to get into this question of, I don't understand this. Why this person has two gravestones, and why the name Mary Morgan is on two of them. So this would be leading into, by degrees, looking at Mary Morgan and all of the work. It would take them to the archive next, when they would look at the documents. And it will all be looking at it, trying to understand it, trying to help the vicar to understand it. And so it's all within this context, this storyline that once Dorothy referred to the drama work of Mantle of the Expert as kind of like a bit of a soap opera. There's a little element of a soap opera going on in terms of here, this storyline she's created of the vicar arriving at the town. But then there's lots of different episodes you can build in. So you're using drama and using this frame of the expert team to engage with problems, issues, and the curriculum. So this Mary Morgan project I've been looking at it as part of our Living History project. And if you go to the website livingmuseums.co.uk, you'll find out more about Mary Morgan and other drama heritage projects that we've been looking at recently. And you can also find out more about Mantle of the Expert on the websites mantlenetwork.com and also mantleoftheexpert.com. There's a Facebook group that I run, the Commission Model of Teaching, with daily posts about Dorothy's work. And there's a YouTube channel for my theatre company, Midland Actors Theatre, which has got lots of Dorothy Heathcote videos on it. So if people have questions, please unmute yourself or put questions in the chat. Roberta, can you unmute yourself? So you met Dorothy, didn't you? Not long before she died.
No, not long, about 3 months before she died, yes.
And how does Mantle changed your teaching, do you think?
I've been connected to drama my whole life, and I always wanted to use it in a different way. And I also have been an educator for a long time. And when I met Dorothy, the way she speaks and what she brought to me was a way to connect the things that I loved and to see how drama can actually change education. I've been working with theater, like producing and stuff like that. But I always thought that really like there might be something else to it, and finding the way to connect it. What drama brings to education was something that really put some light in my eyes, and it just brightened me up. And by reading what Mantle was about, it wasn't very easy to understand how it really worked. And that's why I start digging for more. And I realized that Dorothy was alive. And I went to some workshops with her. And I also saw Look Abbott in action, Yona in action, in Woodrow as well. And by seeing it, I just realized that drama can really make the children come alive while they're learning. So learning is much more than seeing it and listening to it. It's leaving it. And when you leave it, you learn it and it becomes memorable because you always remember those things that you've done. And that's what Mantle does. It did it to me. And that this magical thing that happens is very hard to describe. And by looking at your presentation, uh, it it looks really, really interesting, but it's much more interesting when you see it happening and with little things that you do small things that you introduce, the way you speak, the way you look at the children, bringing some little things to your practice, you already see changes. You see like kids that don't speak, speaking out, kids that are very shy, leading some work. You see children that never ask questions, really asking questions and interesting questions. And they also develop the level of the questions they ask because they really want to learn about what's going on. So they have to shift the way they ask things to be able to get to the root of the problem that they are investigating. And that makes a big difference. And then in the long term, because we see it so much in Woodrow. You see these children that come to the school with no background, like hard lives and stuff. You see so many difficult stories there. And when they leave the school, they've got such a high level of questioning, of understanding, and it really makes a difference in their lives. And it's more than empowering them to learn the subject, is empowering them to become better human beings and for life, really. And because I've been doing it for so long now, you see the results after a long term, and it's really, really nice to see and to be someone that can. Sorry, the word's not coming to me now. I think I've spoken too much Portuguese for the summer holiday, so my English is not up to the point. Um,
That's
but you,
great. Yeah, it's
yeah,
lovely to hear.
you just see it happening, and it's a good feeling, really.
No, you're right. This has really changed the children and changed the whole feeling of the classroom. And it's interesting that you said you started as a theatre practitioner. So it's always an interesting question, really, how much, because I know people here today, some of them are from a theatre background, and some of them may be teachers who have no drama experience. And in fact, in Woodrow School, and I don't think any of the teachers there come from a drama background, but they are using Mantle. But but you can be, if you have theatre background, you can be drawing on that and using that because, in a way, Dorothy's creating a play. When I'm talking about the Mary Morgan work, I know it could go on for a long period, this, but she is thinking in drama terms. She's thinking like a play, creating a play. In a way, it's a living play, obviously, it's not a performance work. There can be some performance elements, but she's structuring it like a play with these drama episodes, with these key moments, and so on. I saw a question in the chat, and it is about from Prasad saying that he works in the film industry, I think. He's an actor and assistant director in theatre and film. And he says, you spoke about Dorothy Heathcote's idea of students being crucibles rather than vessels. I'm curious. In performance making, actors are often treated as vessels for a director's vision. How do you think actors can become crucibles who actively shape the creative process? Well, this is like the problem we're talking about in classrooms, really, that it's about the teacher in the classroom shifting to seeing the children as crucibles rather than vessels. And I hope, because I do directing, I'm a theatre director, I hope that I don't treat actors as empty vessels and that it's a collaborative process and that theatre itself should be a form of when you're in rehearsal rather than the actors being told what to do, it should be together we're finding out how to do this. And in a sense, that's the model that you're also trying to develop in the classroom. Sadhguru, you had your hand up.
Hi, David. Am I
Hello.
audible?
Yes, you are.
Good afternoon. So my question is, I'm blown away by the Mary Morgan project, first of all. The whole process of devising the Mary Morgan tale as a curriculum for teaching students seems to have involved extreme levels of critical deliberation on Dorothy Heathcote's part. And it was aimed towards increasing the levels of leadership and agency in the children, where they are not just following the teacher's orders as we have all uh, I'll speak for myself as I have in school, do this, and then there'll be an exam, ace the exam, and then there'll be the next standard, ace that. It was not as collaborative of a process. But now I see in today's day and age, there are alternative educational methodologies which are available, this being one of them. So how can I, as an educator, become capable of devising such inferences from seemingly mundane or even, as Mary Morgan, disturbing observations from real life and derive such creatively detailed ideas for children to learn from? Is it the same as when, as a theater maker, I go look at an idea and I'm like, oh, this could be a wonderful play. Oh, this could be a live performance. Oh, this could be a living performance, living play. How will the course help me achieve this?
I think it's interesting what you say that you look at things and you can get inspiration from things you look at and you think this could be a play. I mean, if that's your background, then I think that's what you will be drawing on. And I think that's what I draw upon because I have a theatre background and I can see things in theatre terms. And I think one of the things that Mantle can do is it encourages the teacher to be creative in their thinking. So you're not so constrained maybe by the narrowness of the curriculum. You're thinking more imaginatively. I think it gives you that scope to do that and to pick up things that are in your own background that you might spot and you might. I think once you get into this as a way of thinking and a way of working, you spot things and you think, yes, I can use that. Definitely, I can draw on that. And presumably, I'm not sure exactly where this Mary Morgan project came from, but presumably Dorothy saw that and she saw the potential in that as a starting point. And the whole thing was then built around these two gravestones. Preeti, you had your hand up.
Hi, David. It was quite interesting and it was really very nice to look at something this different and try to correlate it with the work that I do. So I work as a storyteller and an art therapist, and I do workshops for children. And there are a lot of areas that are coming to my mind where I could utilize this component to deliver something, especially in the social sciences area. But I'm curious about the Mary Morgan case, where what were the outcomes that Dorothy was expecting to achieve, apart from getting the children involved and the whole principle of the mantle of expert. But what were the final outcomes that she actually observed at the end of this project, if I have to call it that?
So if you look at something like that, you could look at it and say, well, there's lots of potential there for curriculum learning. And one obvious thing would be to focus on history, on learning about that period, on looking at questions of this, like the social hierarchy, because there was very much the rich in the big house and Mary Morgan, who was a servant in the big house, and possibly there's a rumor that the father of her child, those young man who was the heir to the family fortune. So there's all that going on there. It can be about justice and law, but it really depends. I think it's open there for the teacher to see what possibilities there might be. And in the particular case of the class that she was working with, the class teacher's main objective was to do with reading and literacy, because she had a class where there were 30 children and 8 of them couldn't read. 8 of them, I think, were newly arrived migrants, and they couldn't read at all. And here there was a lot of work on reading texts, and quite difficult, challenging texts, but and also writing texts themselves. So they looked at the language of gravestones, and they produced their own gravestones. And one of the things that I think really, I think Roberta was talking about with this kind of work, with the way that children respond to it, they reach a higher level because they are motivated, because they want to do it themselves. So it could have been taken in a quite different direction, but it was really aimed at that group. And so the archive work really fitted in with that, trying to challenge them to read those kind of documents and to...
The children, the reason I asked you this question was because I want to understand how do you logically end this project? Because you can get into the flow of things. Everybody could get very excited and get into it completely to the deep end. How do you logically end such a project? And what was the logical, did children actually end up solving the case in this situation?
I think they did. I'm only at a certain stage at the moment in my researches with it. I'm not sure where it actually ended, but usually a Mantle project will end in what Dorothy calls a publication of some sort, by which she simply means a public sharing. So they could have created some kind of exhibition in the local archive, for example, about the Mary Morgan case, and they might have created short drama scenes to present moments from her story. I'll have to make sure that I let you know once I've got further in this research, because I'm going to be talking to the classroom teacher, Vivali, shortly to get the real full story. I've just been picking up from videos that I've been watching of Dorothy talking about planning the work and so on. So, but usually, yes, it will end up in some kind of way that the children can share all that they've learned with people. It might end up, for example, only with I've often ended Mantle projects with an event of some sort where the children have presented their ideas. Like, okay, if they're creating an exhibition about something, we might invite people in, parents, people from the community, other children from the school, to look at, these are our ideas for this exhibition that we've created. And so it becomes this public event where the young people themselves are sharing what they know, sharing what they've learned. Because I think this is another element in Mantle of the Expert. It's not just that they learn things, they use them, and they teach other people about them. And through that kind of task, you see them growing into this expertise. They become the experts who are telling people. And it's that old idea, isn't it, that if you want to learn something well, you teach it to somebody else and you pass it on. And that's something else that you try and build into Mantle of the Expert all the way through.
Thanks very much for that, David. It's really interesting. I was just thinking about what you were saying earlier. How do you say your name? Is it Preeti? Is it? Yeah. I think sometimes there's a danger in this work of thinking in terms of school, especially in England anyway, people looking at targets. And when you think about the process of it, it's so valuable, because if children are suddenly exercising agency, having some kind of ownership over something, and it's what David said earlier on about it changes the way you teach and it changes the children. And I think it certainly changes the children, because if they're suddenly being active investigators or active anything, that in itself becomes long-term, from my research anyway, that becomes an outcome, because they become changed people, if that's a long process of the way they learn. And the other point I wanted to make was that I think that what I've recognized now more than ever is that the work of Dorothy hasn't just changed my teaching or the children, but it's actually changed the way I think about my life. And I mean, this summer I took someone close to me actually to the hairdresser who has very, very severe mental health difficulties, and she didn't really want to go, and she did want to go, but she was scared, and it's just a simple example really. It came to my mind when you were talking, that when they were cutting her hair, she said, it's not short enough, I want it shorter. And I said, well, why don't you put your finger where you'd like them to cut it? And I was trying to say to her all the time, you are in charge here. You are telling us where to put your finger there. And I'd say, have you got that, to the hairdresser? Have you got that? That's where she wants it. So it was very much, you know, in life, you start to realize that people generally need to bring what they have inside them and bring what they need to any conversation or any action that's taken. And I think that's what Dorothy's work actually lets us do, really. Or, you know, I think it's about that. Underlying all this is about people who have to have choices. You can't force people, really. So to me, it affects everything I do in my life now. Sorry.
And I think that's why, I think you're right. I think that's why, you know, what Roberta said about how quiet children suddenly become very vocal in the classroom, because they feel like what they have to say has a place here and there's a space there.
Absolutely. And we have to pay attention to the children, who they are.
Yeah.
Rather than a sort of one scheme works for everybody. So if anybody was to pick up the Mary Morgan program, you know, you'd be looking at what would work as a way in for these children. You know, I think that's kind of, yeah.
What do they need? Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of complex. And I think David's done a great job of sharing how it works. But it's so much to do underneath all that, like the language. And I imagine on the course, David, you'd be actually looking at how we use language, which is crucial. And there's all these huge things that I mean are to be learned, and I continue to learn, hopefully.
You try to avoid teacher talk. Try to avoid talking like a teacher, so you're talking like a colleague.
Yes. It also has to be a genuine wanting to know what people think, rather than saying, oh, this is a good strategy, I'll behave like I don't really care what they think. Do you see what I mean? Because some people do that as well.
Yeah.
And students of mine have said, oh yeah, that's a good strategy, but they've not really cared, and they've not really listened to the answer, and they've not really developed it. So I think it's, you know, it's a holistic, very holistic thing, and it does change who you are and who you become as a teacher. And for some teachers, they don't want to become those people, so they don't do Mantle. So I think that's something to ask yourselves as well when you go on the course.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Jon.
On.
Thanks, Jon.
Okay.